It was a cold winter evening in New York City. The streets were bustling with holiday shoppers, the twinkling lights of Times Square shining brightly through the thick, frosty air. But in the shadows of the towering skyscrapers, a young boy huddled on the corner of 5th Avenue and 56th Street. His name was Jake, and at just 17, he was already living a life most people couldn't even imagine. Jake's clothes were ragged, worn thin from countless nights on the streets. His shoes had holes in them, and his face was pale, the cold biting into his skin. The little bit of hope he had left was slowly fading. The world felt like an endless series of setbacks, and he couldn't see a way out. He had run away from home 6 months ago, after his stepfather hit him for the last time. He had nowhere to go, and though he had tried to stay optimistic, the city had swallowed him whole. He wrapped his jacket tighter around his shoulders, trying to block out the wind that cut through him like a knife. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts from a nearby street vendor and the exhaust of passing cars. But none of it mattered. Jake felt numb. "Hey, kid, you all right?" a voice called out. Jake looked up, his eyes squinting against the street lights. A man stood before him, wearing an expensive suit and a heavy coat. His face was familiar, but Jake couldn't place it right away. The man had sharp features, a confident demeanor, and a presence that commanded attention. Jake shuffled his feet, feeling embarrassed. "I'm fine," he mumbled, not wanting to engage. He wasn't in the mood for charity, especially not from some stranger. But the man didn't move away. "You sure about that?" The man's voice was firm but kind, his tone one that seemed to soften the edges of the harsh world around them. "It's freezing out here. You shouldn't be alone on a night like this." Jake didn't know what to say. He'd learned long ago not to trust people who looked like they had it all. They didn't care about someone like him. They couldn't. But this man seemed different. Something in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and concern, made Jake hesitate. "Yeah, well, I've been doing okay," Jake muttered, avoiding eye contact. The man looked around for a moment, his gaze scanning the street, then back at Jake. "You look like you've been through a lot. Where are your parents?" Jake stiffened. The mention of his family made his chest tighten. He didn't want to talk about them. His mom? She was gone, emotionally distant and wrapped up in her own mess. His stepdad? Well, he'd done more than just leave scars. He'd been the reason Jake ran away in the first place. "They're not around," Jake said flatly. The man's gaze softened, as if he understood. He took a step closer, but not too close, maintaining a respectful distance. "All right. Look, I'm not here to judge you, but you don't have to keep doing this alone." Jake looked up at him, the stranger's face now clearer in the dim light. That was when he recognized him. The suit, the confident posture, the sharp eyes. He knew exactly who this man was. This wasn't just anyone. This was Donald Trump, the real estate mogul and businessman, a name everyone knew. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Could this really be happening? A man like him, standing here, offering help to someone like Jake? Trump tilted his head slightly. "I know what it's like to struggle, believe me. Everyone faces hard times. But the trick is, you don't have to face them alone." Jake blinked, unsure of how to respond. Was this some kind of joke? It felt surreal. But there was something in Trump's eyes, something genuine, that made Jake pause. "Listen," Trump continued, his tone firm but kind. "I can't let you stay out here in the cold. Come with me. I'll get you something to eat, a warm place to stay for the night." Jake's mind raced. A warm place? Something to eat? It sounded too good to be true. He had spent so many nights hungry, too afraid to even ask for help. The thought of getting something hot to eat, something more than a cup of soup or a stale sandwich, felt like a distant dream. "Why would you help me?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. Trump smiled, a look that seemed to mix kindness with an unspoken understanding. "Because everyone deserves a second chance, and I think you've got potential. Don't throw that away." Jake stood frozen for a moment, caught between disbelief and the sliver of hope that was finally creeping back into his heart. Could he really trust this man? Could this strange encounter lead to something better? "Come on," Trump said, extending a hand toward Jake. "Let me help you." For a moment, Jake just stared at the hand, uncertain of what to do. The street was still noisy, people walking by without a second glance at him, and yet, Here was this man, a billionaire, offering him help when no one else had. "All right," Jake finally muttered. He took a deep breath and, against all odds, reached out to shake Trump's hand. Little did he know, this small decision would change the course of his life forever. Interactive question. What would you do if you found yourself in Jake's shoes? Would you trust someone offering a chance to start over? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Jake's feet ached as he walked beside Donald Trump, the sound of his worn-out shoes tapping against the city pavement. The lights of New York flickered around him, but they felt distant, almost surreal. A part of him still couldn't believe what had just happened. A billionaire, someone who didn't need to care about a street kid like him, had just offered to help. But despite the warmth of Trump's gesture, Jake's mind was clouded with doubt. They walked through the streets, with Trump leading the way. Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his stomach tight with anxiety. There were too many questions he didn't have answers to. Why would someone like Trump help someone like me? Jake thought to himself. The streets had taught him to be cautious, to trust no one. No one had ever helped him without expecting something in return, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was some catch to this. Trump glanced over at Jake, his expression calm, as if this was just another day in the life of a busy businessman. "So, Jake," Trump began, breaking the silence, "what brings you out here? You don't look like you belong on these streets." Jake shrugged, his eyes on the ground. "It's a long story," he muttered, not wanting to go into the painful details. The truth was, there were too many pieces of his life that still haunted him, too many memories of his broken family and the fight that led him to leave home. He hadn't wanted to be there in the first place, but he didn't have anywhere else to go. And when you were homeless, you learned to survive any way you could. Trump nodded, as if sensing Jake's reluctance to share. "I get it, but it's important to know where you came from if you're ever going to figure out where you're going. You can't outrun your past forever, but you can learn from it." Jake gave a small nod. He'd heard that kind of talk before, but it never meant much. People loved to say things like that, but they never really understood. No one in his life had ever truly listened to him. Not his mom, not his stepdad, not the countless people he'd encountered on the streets. It was easier to just keep your head down, to blend in and not raise any suspicion. People only helped when it suited them, or when they wanted something in return. As they approached Trump Tower, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The building was a monument to wealth and power, a towering symbol of everything Jake had always been on the outside of. He had no idea what to expect next, but something inside him felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Trump led him inside the lobby, the warmth enveloping Jake as they passed through the heavy glass doors. The opulence of the space was overwhelming. Gleaming marble floors, massive chandeliers, and walls adorned with gold accents. It was the kind of place Jake had only seen in magazines or on TV, but never in real life. It was so far removed from the dingy alleyways and street corners that Jake had come to know all too well. "I know it's a lot to take in," Trump said, noticing Jake's wide-eyed expression. "But sometimes, the first step to changing your life is simply seeing that there's something bigger out there for you. You don't have to stay where you are." Jake nodded again, though he wasn't sure he fully understood. Something bigger? What did that even mean? To him, the world had always been small. His world, at least. It was a world of survival, of getting by with whatever scraps he could find. But here, in this lobby, he felt like he was standing in another world altogether. A world that felt both foreign and exciting, yet intimidating. Trump motioned for Jake to sit on a plush chair near the lobby. A receptionist at the front desk smiled politely at them as Trump took a seat across from Jake, a certain authority in his demeanor. For a brief moment, the city's noise outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the hum of quiet conversation between the two of them. "You're probably wondering why I'm doing this," Trump said, breaking the silence again. "Let's be honest, you don't exactly fit the mold of someone I normally offer help to. But I see something in you, Jake. I see potential. And I think you could make something of yourself if you're willing to put in the work. A lot of people have to struggle their whole lives without ever getting a real chance. I'm offering you that chance." Jake stared at him, his mind reeling. Potential? Me? He couldn't fathom what Trump was seeing. To Jake, he was just another kid trying to survive the streets. He wasn't someone important. He didn't have the right skills, the right background, or the right connections. All he had was the scars from his past, and they were starting to feel like they would define him forever. I don't know if I can do it, Jake admitted, his voice small. I'm not like people who have everything figured out. I don't even have a high school diploma. Trump leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but filled with conviction. You don't need a diploma to start over, Jake. You need the will to try. That's what I'm offering you. An opportunity. You can take it or leave it. But I think you'll find that the world out there isn't as closed off as you think. It's not just for the people who were born with money or luck. It's for anyone who's willing to work hard. Jake's heart pounded as he absorbed Trump's words. They were the first real words of encouragement he'd heard in years. But still, doubt lingered in the back of his mind. Was this just another false promise? Or could it really be his chance to break free from the life he'd known? Trump stood up and extended a hand toward him. Come with me. Let's get you something to eat, and then we'll talk about the next steps. Jake hesitated for a moment, uncertainty still swirling in his chest. But deep down, something inside him stirred. What if this was real? What if this was my chance? He took a deep breath and reached out, shaking Trump's hand. And just like that, his life was about to change forever. Jake couldn't remember the last time he'd sat down to eat something hot. The simple act of sitting at a table, away from the cold, felt surreal. As Trump led him into an elegant dining area inside the Trump Tower, the aroma of freshly cooked food surrounded them. Jake blinked, taking in his surroundings. The polished wood tables, the gleaming silverware, the soft, ambient lighting that created a feeling of warmth and comfort. It was worlds away from the grim reality of the streets. You hungry? Trump asked, already pulling out a chair for Jake, his voice casual as if he did this for people every day. Jake nodded, unable to find words at first. His stomach growled loudly, almost as if it, too, was in disbelief at the opportunity. Yeah, Jake said softly, finally breaking out of the silence. Starving. Trump smiled, nodding at a waiter standing nearby. Bring him whatever he wants. We're not skimping on anything tonight. Jake's eyes widened. I don't want to take advantage. No, taking advantage here, Trump interrupted. This is about you having a seat at the table. Everyone deserves that. The waiter brought over a menu, but Jake barely glanced at it. What did it matter? He hadn't been in a real restaurant in so long. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd been able to make a choice. He was too overwhelmed by the sheer luxury of it all. The waiter kindly asked what Jake would like, and after a few moments of hesitation, Jake ordered a steak, mashed potatoes, and a side of vegetables. He could feel his cheeks flush with embarrassment as he realized just how hungry he truly was. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the dignity, the chance to be treated like a person again. As they waited for the food, Trump sat across from Jake, looking at him with a kind of expectation. Jake didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable. But there was something about Trump that made him feel like he didn't have to hide. Like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Tell me about your life, Trump said, leaning back in his chair slightly. Where did you grow up? Jake hesitated. It wasn't something he liked talking about. His childhood was a mix of pain and confusion. His mom had always been distant, absorbed in her own struggles, and his stepdad, well, he was the reason Jake had ended up on the streets. I grew up in Brooklyn, Jake began, his voice low. My mom and I moved there when I was a kid. She married a guy who, he wasn't great. He was, well, abusive. To her, to me. So, I left. I couldn't take it anymore. Trump's expression softened as he listened, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. It was the first time Jake had ever told someone about his stepfather, about the nights he'd spent hiding from the anger, the fear, and the loneliness. He wasn't sure why he felt comfortable talking to Trump, but there was something in the way the man listened that made him want to share. I didn't have anywhere to go. I thought I could make it on my own, but it's hard out there. It's tough, you know? People don't care about you. Not unless you're someone important. Jake looked down at his hands, tracing the lines of his fingers. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to get out of this. Trump leaned forward, his voice calm but strong. Jake, listen. You don't need to have all the answers right now. What matters is that you're here, sitting at this table, and you're willing to take the next step. That's what counts. Not everyone gets a second chance, but you do, and I believe in you. Jake blinked. You do? Trump nodded. Absolutely. I've seen a lot of people who've come from nothing and made something of themselves. The difference between them and others isn't talent, it's determination. It's about being willing to fight for a better life, no matter what. And right now, you're doing that just by being here. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He had never had someone believe in him before. Sure, people had said encouraging things, but it always felt like they were just words. This felt different. Trump wasn't just talking. He was investing in him. The weight of it all began to sink in. Why are you doing this? Jake asked, his voice shaking slightly. I don't get it. You don't know me. Why help me? Trump leaned back, his hands folded in front of him. Because, Jake, I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to be overlooked, to feel like you're never going to make it. I didn't get to where I am by accident, but I didn't do it alone, either. People helped me when I needed it. Now it's my turn to pay it forward. You have a chance to change your life. Don't waste it. Jake felt something stir inside him, a flicker of belief, a tiny seed of hope. It was the first time in a long while that he felt like maybe he wasn't just a product of his circumstances. Maybe he had a future. And for the first time in months, he wasn't sure how, but he was willing to fight for it. Their food arrived then, and Jake's attention shifted to the plate before him. A perfectly cooked steak, mashed potatoes and vegetables, steaming and warm. He hesitated for just a moment before picking up his fork, his hunger taking over. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed the simple pleasure of a good meal. Trump watched him for a moment, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Enjoy, he said. There's more where that came from. This is just the start. Jake looked up, his mouth full of food, but his heart was fuller than it had been in ages. Maybe Trump was right. Maybe this was a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, Jake allowed himself to believe that it was. The days following Jake's first dinner at Trump Tower felt like a blur. For the first time in what felt like forever, he woke up with a sense of purpose, something that had been missing from his life for far too long. The routine he'd once accepted in his world on the streets seemed far away now, as if it belonged to a different person. The uncertainty of it all still weighed on him, but there was a glimmer of something else now. Hope. Trump had given Jake a number to call and a simple instruction. Call me when you're ready to take the next step. At first, Jake wasn't sure what that meant. What was the next step? But deep down, he knew that his life couldn't stay the same. He needed to make a choice. A few days passed before Jake found himself standing in front of the Trump Tower building again. He had never thought he'd come back. It felt almost like a dream, but here he was. He felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety in his chest, his nerves racing as he dialed the number Trump had given him. Hello, Jake. Trump's voice came through the phone, calm and reassuring. Are you ready for that next step? I think so, Jake said, swallowing the nervous lump in his throat. I don't know what it is exactly, but I want to try. I want to change. I want to see if this opportunity is real. Trump chuckled lightly. It's real. Come to my office, and we'll talk. Don't worry, I'll help you figure it out. Jake hung up the phone and looked up at the towering building. It felt different, standing there now. The sleek glass windows and massive entrance didn't intimidate him as they once did. He was here for a reason. He belonged, at least for this moment. The elevator ride up to Trump's office was a quiet one, with only the soft hum of the elevator filling the space. Jake's reflection in the polished silver walls stared back at him, and he couldn't help but notice how different he looked. The bags under his eyes had started to fade, and his posture, once hunched and defensive, had straightened out slightly. Maybe it was the food. Maybe it was the promise of a future. Either way, he felt like he was shedding parts of his old self. When the doors opened, a man in a sharp suit greeted him and led him to a large office at the end of the hall. The room was filled with light, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. And sitting at a large desk, with a warm smile on his face, was Donald Trump. Jake, "Welcome back," Trump said, standing to shake his hand. "Glad you could make it." Jake felt a little out of place, but Trump's smile made him feel less like an outsider. "Thanks for having me," Jake replied, his voice unsure but grateful. "Let's get to work," Trump said, motioning to the chair across from him. As Jake sat down, Trump pushed a few papers across the desk toward him. "I know you don't have a high school diploma, Jake. That's not a problem for me. I've seen enough people who have come from nothing and made it big. But what I need to know is this: are you willing to learn?" Jake's heart raced. Willing to learn? It seemed like such a simple question, but the weight of it made it feel heavier. His entire life had been about surviving, not learning. He had never had the chance to learn anything beyond what was necessary to get by. He had dropped out of high school after his mom's divorce, and since then, he had worked odd jobs, anything he could get, just to stay off the streets. "I think so," Jake replied slowly. "I mean, I've never had the chance before. But if you're saying I can learn something, I'm willing to try." Trump leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile on his face. "That's all I needed to hear. I've arranged for you to get some education, something practical. You're going to work with my team, get experience, and learn the ins and outs of business. I'm not offering you a free ride. You'll have to work hard for it, but you'll have support along the way." Jake blinked in disbelief. "You're offering me a job?" Trump nodded. "It's more than a job. It's a chance to rebuild your life. A real chance. I'm not going to tell you it will be easy, but it will be worth it. And the best part? You'll be making a difference in your own future." Jake felt a mix of emotions, a wave of gratitude, disbelief, and fear. He had never had anyone offer him something like this before. It wasn't just about money or security. It was about a future that didn't seem so far out of reach anymore. "I don't know what to say," Jake murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know if I can do it, but I want to try." Trump stood up and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "That's all anyone can ask of you. Just try. It's a journey, and there will be obstacles, but you're not alone. And I'll be here to guide you." Jake stood up, feeling both overwhelmed and hopeful. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll give it my all." Trump nodded. "I believe you will. Now, let's get started. We've got a long road ahead, but it starts today." As Jake walked out of Trump's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose, something to work toward, something that could get him out of the rut he'd been stuck in. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. The journey was just beginning. Jake had spent the past week in a whirlwind of meetings, lessons, and new experiences. It felt like his mind was on overdrive, processing everything at once. Trump's team had started him with some basics, business strategies, management principles, and even a few lessons on financial literacy. At first, it was overwhelming, but Jake could feel himself soaking it all in. He was learning at a pace that amazed him. The information wasn't just theoretical. It felt real, like it could make a difference. But then, things got tougher. It wasn't the lessons or the work that was difficult. Jake had started to get the hang of those. It was the pressure. His mentor, Mark, was one of Trump's senior executives, a man who had been with the company for years. Mark was strict, demanding, and his expectations were high. One day, as Jake sat at his desk in one of the sleek offices overlooking the city, Mark walked in, his expression serious. Jake stood up quickly, his heart beating faster. He had a feeling this was going to be one of those moments that could make or break his future. "Jake, I've been watching your progress," Mark said, his voice calm but authoritative. "You've got potential, but potential means nothing if you don't learn how to perform under pressure." Jake's stomach dropped. "I've been working hard, Mark. I've been putting in the time. What's the problem?" Mark folded his arms, looking at Jake with a critical eye. "The problem is, you're doing the easy things well. But the real challenge comes when the pressure's on. I want you to prove to me that you can handle the tough stuff. If you want to be part of this team, I need to see that you're not afraid to fail, that you can make decisions, and that you'll stand by them." Jake wasn't sure what Mark was getting at. He had been doing everything right, hadn't he? He had been punctual, he had worked on every project with focus, and he had stayed late when needed. But Mark didn't seem impressed. Mark's eyes narrowed. There's a meeting tomorrow with a potential investor. You'll be presenting one of our projects. I want to see how you handle it. It's sink or swim, Jake. Can you step up? Jake's throat went dry. A presentation? To an investor? He hadn't even spoken to many people outside the office, let alone pitched anything to someone who could affect the company's future. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, Jake admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. I don't have experience with that kind of thing. Mark looked at him with an almost unreadable expression. And you think that matters? Life doesn't care if you're ready. Life throws things at you, and you either adapt or you don't. You've been given a chance, Jake. Don't waste it. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. It felt like everything he had worked for was now riding on this one moment. He couldn't back down. Not now. I'll do it, Jake said, his voice more confident than he felt. I'll handle the presentation. I'll make it work. Mark gave a slight nod, his expression softening just a little. Good. I'll be there to observe. Don't screw this up, Jake. The next day, Jake spent hours preparing. He reviewed the details of the project, practiced his speech in front of a mirror, and even asked a few of his colleagues for advice. But as the time of the meeting approached, his nerves only grew. He had never been the type of person who was comfortable in the spotlight. Public speaking was his biggest fear. He had to fight the urge to back out, to take the easy way out. But Jake knew this was a test, and he had to pass it. There was no turning back now. When the meeting room door finally opened, Jake walked in, his heart racing. He saw the investor, a sharply dressed man with an air of authority. Trump was standing beside him, smiling and nodding as Jake entered. Jake could feel his palms sweat. The room felt colder than it had just moments ago, and the walls seemed to close in on him. Mr. Jacobs, the investor said, offering a polite handshake. It's good to meet you. I've heard good things about you. Jake nodded, his throat dry. Thank you for the opportunity. Trump stood nearby, his eyes steady and encouraging. He had a way of making everything feel more manageable, like it wasn't as big of a deal as it seemed. But Jake knew that Trump was counting on him, and that weighed heavily on his shoulders. Jake took a deep breath and began his presentation. He started by introducing the project and detailing the key metrics, but as he spoke, he could feel the tension rising in his chest. His voice started to tremble. He pushed through it, focusing on the slides in front of him, and forced himself to remember everything he had learned. The numbers, the strategy, it all started to come together in his mind. The more he spoke, the more confident he became. By the time he reached the final slide, his nerves had settled somewhat, and he was almost enjoying it. But then came the hard part. The investor asked a difficult question, one that Jake hadn't anticipated. The answer wasn't clear-cut, and for a moment, Jake panicked. His mind raced. He could feel his stomach tighten, and he was afraid that he might choke. Then, in that moment, something inside him clicked. Jake remembered what Trump had told him. Don't be afraid to fail. Make decisions, stand by them, and learn from your mistakes. Jake swallowed hard and responded, his voice steady this time. I don't have a perfect answer for that right now, but here's what I can tell you. He explained his reasoning, providing a solution that wasn't perfect, but it was well thought out and practical. The investor seemed to appreciate his honesty, nodding slowly as Jake finished. The room fell quiet for a few moments, and then the investor smiled. Well, Jake, I appreciate your candor. You may not have all the answers, but I see potential in you. I'm willing to move forward with this project. Jake felt a rush of relief flood over him, as if he had just climbed a mountain. He hadn't been perfect, but he had done it. He had faced the challenge head-on and come out on top. Trump clapped Jake on the back as they left the room. You did great, Jake. I knew you had it in you. Jake let out a long breath. I can't believe it. You believed in yourself, and that made all the difference, Trump said with a smile. Jake walked out of the meeting room feeling like a different person. He wasn't just the homeless kid anymore. He was someone with a future, someone who could rise to the occasion, no matter how tough it got. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Jake knew he was ready for whatever came next. Jake couldn't remember the last time he had felt so alive. After the meeting with the investor, things started to move quickly. Trump's team saw something in him, something raw and untapped. They didn't expect him to be perfect. They just needed him to show up, to try, and to learn. And that's exactly what Jake was doing. For the next few weeks, Jake was immersed in the world of business. Each day brought something new, new tasks, new challenges, and new lessons. But even with all the changes, one thing became clear. The real challenge wasn't just learning how to be successful in business. It was learning how to believe in himself. Jake had never been good at that. He had spent so much of his life doubting his worth, convinced that the world didn't have a place for him. It was easier to believe that life was unfair, that he would always be the kid from the streets, that people like him didn't belong in places like Trump Tower. But now, every day, he was forced to confront that belief. And with each small victory, that old, ingrained fear started to break apart. One afternoon, after a long series of meetings, Jake was sitting in the office, going over some reports when he noticed Trump walking by. He was on his way to a meeting, but as he saw Jake, he stopped and smiled. "Jake, how's it going?" Trump asked, his voice casual, but with that underlying sense of authority that made Jake sit up straighter. "I'm learning a lot," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But it's a lot to take in." Trump nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Business is a learning game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But I see you getting it. And remember, I'm not just looking for someone who can do the job. I'm looking for someone who can rise to the occasion when things get tough." Jake looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Trump leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "I've been in business long enough to know that life isn't all about smooth sailing. It's about handling adversity. When things go south, the real measure of a person is how they react, how they keep going, even when the pressure's on." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. "You mean like the presentation?" Trump smiled. "Exactly. That was a good start, but it was just a warm-up. The real test is coming. And when it does, you'll be ready. Just keep your head on straight, focus, and rise above the challenges. That's how you win." Jake nodded slowly. "I won't let you down." Trump gave him a sharp look. "I know you won't. But remember this. You're not just doing this for me or the company. You're doing it for yourself. This is your chance to change your life." A week later, the real test came. Jake was handed a project that required him to collaborate with a team of other young professionals. It was a high-stakes assignment involving the launch of a new product. The pressure was immense. This was the kind of project that could make or break someone's career. Jake found himself working late into the nights, coordinating with designers, marketing experts, and even a few of the top executives. Every decision felt weighty. Every phone call felt like it could be a turning point. There were moments when Jake wanted to crack under the pressure, to walk away, but he remembered Trump's words, "Rise above." As the deadline approached, things started to fall apart. A key marketing strategy wasn't working, and a potential partnership deal fell through. Jake could feel the tension in the office, the growing panic of the team. People were starting to point fingers, placing blame. And that's when Jake realized something important. The environment around him was crumbling under the pressure, but he didn't feel that same sense of panic. Instead of reacting with fear, Jake took a deep breath, focused, and went back to the basics. He pulled his team together, calm but firm. "Look, we've got a problem, but we also have a solution," Jake said, standing in front of the group. "We're not going to let this fall apart. We've come too far. Let's reassess the strategy, find out what's working, and fix what's not. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, just adjust it. Who's with me?" The team, initially skeptical, started nodding, their energy shifting from defeat to determination. Jake made it clear that this wasn't the end of the world. It was just another challenge they needed to overcome together. By the time the deadline arrived, the team had pulled off a near-miraculous turnaround. The new product was ready for launch, the marketing strategy had been refined, and the partnership issues had been addressed. The room was filled with the buzz of success. Jake couldn't believe it when he walked into Trump's office that afternoon with the final reports. He was exhausted, his body aching from the long hours, but there was a sense of satisfaction in him that he had never experienced before. Trump looked up from his desk as Jake entered, a smile spreading across his face. "You did it, Jake," Trump said, standing to shake his hand. "I knew you had it in you. You handled that like a pro." Jake's eyes widened. I still can't believe it worked. Trump smiled. You just had to believe in yourself. That's the first step. The rest follows after that. Jake grinned, feeling a sense of pride that he hadn't known he was capable of. He wasn't just the homeless kid anymore. He wasn't even the guy struggling to keep up. He was someone who had faced adversity head-on, someone who had risen above. Later that evening, as Jake walked back to his apartment, the streets felt different. The city, which had always seemed so intimidating, now felt like a place he could conquer. It was the same city, but Jake wasn't the same person anymore. He had risen, and he wasn't about to stop. Jake thought he had finally found his rhythm. He had faced some of the toughest challenges of his life, from public speaking to handling high-pressure situations, and he had emerged victorious. But life, as always, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. One crisp morning, Jake received an unexpected phone call while sipping his coffee at his desk. It was Mark, Trump's senior executive. His voice, usually calm and steady, sounded unusually tense. "Jake, we need to talk," Mark said, his words clipped. "There's been a situation with the project launch. I need you to meet me in the conference room now." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He could tell this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. He quickly grabbed his notes and rushed to the conference room, his mind racing. What could have gone wrong? They had worked so hard to make everything perfect. As Jake entered the room, Mark and several other members of the team were gathered around the table, their faces grim. Trump was there too, his arms crossed, his eyes locked on Jake as he took a seat. "Jake, we've hit a serious snag with the launch," Mark said, without preamble. "One of the key partners in the deal has pulled out. They've cited concerns about the product's market potential. This could jeopardize everything we've worked for." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. The product launch had been their biggest opportunity yet. Everything had been riding on it. The partners, the investors, the marketing. It all hinged on this one crucial moment. And now, it was falling apart. "I don't understand," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly. "How could they pull out at the last minute? We've been working with them for months. We've done everything right." Trump's eyes softened, but his tone was direct. "Jake, business is unpredictable. Sometimes, despite all the planning, things just don't go the way you expect. The best we can do now is figure out a solution." Jake felt the weight of the moment. He had been through the highs, the victories, but now it seemed like everything was slipping away. The disappointment, the pressure, the fear. It all rushed in at once. Mark leaned forward. "We need to salvage what we can. This situation could either make you or break you, Jake. How you respond to this setback will define you. You need to get back out there and fix it. And fast." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. The weight of the task ahead was heavy, but he knew what he had to do. He wasn't about to let everything fall apart because of one setback. For the next few days, Jake dove into damage control mode. He worked with the team to address the concerns the partner had raised, reviewing the product's market data, reanalyzing the strategy, and reaching out to potential new partners. But despite his efforts, nothing seemed to be moving fast enough. Every phone call felt like it was leading to another dead end. No one seemed willing to take a risk on a product that had already been rejected. Jake spent hours going over the numbers, revising the pitch, and trying to find new ways to present the product. The clock was ticking, and the pressure mounted with each passing hour. The weight of the responsibility was crushing. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about proving to himself that he could rise to the occasion. He couldn't afford to fail now. Late one night, after another round of rejected proposals, Jake sat alone in the conference room, his head in his hands. He had done everything he could think of, and yet, nothing was working. Doubt crept in, just as it always did when things seemed hopeless. "What am I missing?" Jake muttered to himself, the exhaustion setting in. "Why isn't this working?" It was in that moment of frustration that Trump walked in, his footsteps echoing through the room. Jake didn't look up, too consumed by his own thoughts. "Jake," Trump's voice was calm, but firm. "I know you're under a lot of pressure, but you're not alone in this. I've been through setbacks like this before. It's part of the game. The key is not to give up when it seems like everything's falling apart." Jake lifted his head, meeting Trump's gaze. "I've tried everything, Mr. Trump. It's like I'm hitting a wall. We're running out of time. I don't know what else to do. Trump walked over to the table, his expression thoughtful. Listen, Jake, you're looking at this the wrong way. You're so focused on the product and the numbers that you're forgetting the one thing that matters most. People. Jake furrowed his brow. People? Trump nodded. Business is about relationships. It's about trust. You've built this project, but now you need to focus on building trust with the partners, the investors, and everyone who has a stake in this. You need to be real with them. You need to show them why this product matters, not just for the market, but for them. Show them you believe in it, and they'll believe in it too. Jake felt a surge of realization. All this time, he had been focused on the logistics, the numbers, and the technicalities of the launch. But Trump was right. He hadn't been focusing on the people behind the numbers, the ones who needed to see the vision, the heart behind the product. I get it, Jake said, the weight of the solution starting to lift. It's not just about the pitch. It's about connecting with them. Trump smiled. Exactly. People don't buy products. They buy into people. If you believe in what you're doing, others will follow. You've got this, Jake. The next day, Jake put Trump's advice into action. He reached out to the partners one by one, personally. He didn't present data or try to sell them on the product. Instead, he told them why he believed in it. He shared his story, how he had come from nothing, how he had learned from his mistakes, and how this product wasn't just another business venture, but a way to make a real impact. He made it personal, and slowly, things began to turn around. By the end of the week, several potential partners had come back to the table. They weren't just interested in the product, they were invested in Jake's vision. His sincerity and passion had made all the difference. The deal wasn't completely finalized, but for the first time in days, Jake felt a flicker of hope. As Jake stood outside, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was the hardest challenge yet, but it was also the most rewarding. He had faced the setback head-on, learned from it, and kept going. And that, Jake realized, was the key to success. Not avoiding failure, but learning how to rise again after it. Jake woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand, the early morning light streaming through the window. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the notification. It was an email from one of the major investors, the ones who had been hesitant about moving forward with the project after the partner pulled out. This was the moment that could either make or break everything he had worked for. He rubbed his eyes, his mind still groggy, but his excitement quickly replaced any remnants of sleepiness. He opened the email, his eyes scanning the lines of text. It was a proposal for a meeting. The words jumped out at him. We've reconsidered. We would like to discuss potential next steps. A wave of relief washed over him. After the last few days of tension, where every call seemed like a dead end, this was the breakthrough he had been praying for. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning at Trump Tower. Jake had prepared himself for the meeting with the investors, but now he had to focus on his next challenge, presenting himself confidently, knowing that this was his opportunity to turn the entire situation around. He knew this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about proving to himself and everyone else that he was capable of leading. He had no idea how much of an impact this meeting would have on his life. When Jake entered the sleek conference room the next morning, he was surprised to see the investors already seated, looking serious and focused. Trump was there too, standing by the window, arms crossed, as usual. Jake could feel the pressure mounting as he walked to the front of the room and set down his laptop. The silence in the room felt deafening. Jake's mind raced, but he couldn't let the anxiety take over. This was his moment. "Good morning," Jake began, his voice steady but with a hint of nervousness. "I know we've had some setbacks, but I'm here to show you why this project is worth your investment." He clicked a button, and the projector screen lit up with the first slide of his presentation. It wasn't just about the product or the market numbers this time. It was about the bigger picture. Jake spoke from the heart. This product isn't just another item in the market. It's a solution. A solution to problems that people like me, people who've had to fight their way through life, face every day. I've seen firsthand what happens when people are left behind. I've been that person, but I'm not that person anymore. And neither should you let your investments be. Jake's eyes were locked on the investors as he continued, his confidence growing with each passing minute. He knew the data was important, But it wasn't the only thing they needed to hear. They needed to understand the heart behind this business. It's not just about the numbers. It's about what this product represents. It's about empowering people. People who have been overlooked, people who've struggled. That's why I believe in it so much. Because it represents more than success. It represents change. He paused, letting his words sink in. He could see the investors exchanging glances. The tension was still thick, but there was a shift, a sense of consideration. After the presentation, there was silence. Jake sat back in his chair, his hands gripping the sides of the table as he waited for their response. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Trump, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally broke the quiet. "Jake," Trump said, his voice calm but intense, "that's the kind of passion I like to see. But we've been burned before. We need to see more. How will you ensure this time that it doesn't fail? What's your plan if the market doesn't respond as we hope?" Jake took a deep breath. He had prepared for this. He had the data, the strategy, and the backup plans ready to go. But this question was different. It wasn't just about presenting numbers anymore. It was about answering the doubts they had in their minds. "I know that this is risky," Jake said, his voice strong. "But the risk is what makes this worthwhile. I've learned that in business and in life. You can't be afraid to fail if you're ever going to succeed. And this time, we're not just launching a product. We're creating a movement. We're going to connect with people, build loyalty, and provide something they need, something they can't get anywhere else. We're going to use social media, grassroots marketing, and targeted outreach. We'll start small, build trust, and grow from there. I'm not just asking for your money. I'm asking for your belief in this vision." Jake looked each investor in the eye, his heart pounding. This was it. If he couldn't make them believe in him now, he knew it would be over. But he wasn't just asking for their belief. He was offering them something they couldn't ignore. He was offering them a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves. The room fell silent once again. The investors exchanged looks, and Trump stepped forward. He was smiling. "Jake, that was exactly what I needed to hear. You've proven that you've got what it takes." "We're in," Trump said, his voice filled with approval. Jake felt his heart race. "Wait, you mean it?" Trump's smile widened. "Yes, we're in. But remember, this is just the beginning. There's a long road ahead, and the real challenge starts now. You're going to need to push even harder than before. Are you ready for that?" Jake stood up, a smile spreading across his face. "I'm ready." As Jake left the meeting, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter than it had in days. The deal had been secured, but more importantly, he had proven something to himself. He wasn't the homeless kid who had stumbled into Trump Tower months ago. He wasn't the guy filled with self-doubt and fear. He was someone who had faced every obstacle, every challenge, and had emerged victorious. But Jake knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He had faced setbacks before, and he would face them again. What mattered was how he responded, how he rose above it all. The weeks following the investor meeting were a whirlwind. Jake's life, once uncertain and filled with doubt, had taken a dramatic turn. The deal had gone through, the product launch was back on track, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he was truly in control of his future. But with success came even greater pressure. The stakes were higher now, and he knew it wasn't going to get any easier. He had spent countless hours with the team, refining strategies, strengthening relationships with new partners, and focusing on marketing efforts. The investors were on board, but they were not passive. They demanded results, and Jake was determined not to disappoint them. Despite the whirlwind, Trump was always there. His presence unwavering, his guidance sharp. Jake had begun to see Trump as more than just a business mogul. He had become a mentor, someone who had seen it all and was willing to share his hard-earned wisdom with Jake. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments of doubt, setbacks, and frustrations. But Jake had learned how to handle them. Every time he faced a challenge, he reminded himself of the bigger picture, the reason he started this journey in the first place. To make a real impact, to change lives, and to prove that success wasn't just about the end goal. It was about the journey. One crisp evening, Jake found himself sitting in Trump Tower, preparing for one of the most important moments of his career. The final product was ready for its public debut, and the launch event was fast approaching. Jake had arranged everything meticulously, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. This was his chance to show the world, and himself, that he was capable of leading a successful venture. As he sat in the conference room, reviewing the final touches with his team, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. The uncertainty, the homelessness, the doubts, all of it seemed so far behind him now. But the journey hadn't been without its hardships. He thought back to the dark nights on the streets, the feeling of hopelessness that seemed to consume him. He had wanted to give up so many times, but something had always pushed him forward. His determination, his vision, and the belief that things could change. And now, here he was, standing on the edge of something incredible. The night of the launch event arrived, and the excitement in the air was palpable. The venue was packed with influential figures from the business world, investors, and media. The lights were bright, the atmosphere electric. Jake could feel the tension in his chest, but he took a deep breath and reminded himself. This was his moment. As the night unfolded, everything went according to plan. The product presentation was a success, the crowd was engaged, and the investors were impressed. The energy was contagious. Jake could hardly believe it. This was happening. This was the result of months of hard work, setbacks, and sacrifices. As the event came to a close, Jake stood at the front of the room, looking out over the crowd. He had done it, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever doubted him, for everyone who had been in his shoes. He had proven that anything was possible with determination, passion, and a little help from those who believed in him. Trump walked up to him, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, Jake. I knew you had it in you." Jake turned to Trump, gratitude swelling in his chest. "I couldn't have done it without you. You've taught me more than I ever could have imagined. You've shown me what it takes to succeed, and more importantly, what it takes to believe in myself." Trump chuckled. "You had it in you all along. I just helped you see it. But this is just the beginning, Jake. Now, the real work begins." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of the statement. He had reached a major milestone, but the journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, lessons to learn, and obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, Jake felt ready. The days that followed were filled with new challenges. The market had responded positively, and the product was gaining traction. But the road ahead wasn't easy. There were competitors to outmaneuver, logistical issues to tackle, and the constant pressure to stay ahead of the curve. Jake's work never stopped, but it didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like a mission to make a difference, to build something meaningful. In the midst of all the chaos, Jake received a call from his mom. She had heard about the success of the product launch and couldn't believe how far Jake had come. There were tears in her voice as she congratulated him, and for the first time in years, Jake felt a sense of pride, not just for the success, but for the fact that he had proven to his family that he could stand on his own 2 feet. "Jake," his mom said through the phone, "I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard, and it's finally paying off. I always knew you had it in you." Jake smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." As the conversation ended, Jake looked out over the city skyline, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. The man he was now was a far cry from the homeless teen who had once wandered the streets, unsure of his future. He had found his purpose, his drive, and his place in the world. Jake's success wasn't just about the product anymore. It was about something much bigger. People were noticing him, and more importantly, they were inspired by his story. As the product continued to gain traction in the market, Jake found himself stepping into a new role, not just a businessman, but a symbol of hope. The media caught wind of Jake's journey, and soon he was being interviewed by local news outlets, podcasts, and even national television. The headlines all read the same: from homeless to CEO, the rise of Jake Reynolds. But what Jake wasn't expecting was the emotional impact his story had on people. He began receiving letters, emails, and messages from people who had been in his shoes, people who felt lost, people who had given up. They saw Jake's success and suddenly felt like maybe, just maybe, they too could overcome their struggles. One afternoon, while reviewing some business proposals in his office, Jake's phone buzzed with a message. He picked it up, expecting another media request or business question. But when he opened the message, It was from a woman named Lily, a young mother who had just lost her job and was struggling to keep a roof over her family's head. Her message read, "Jake, I saw your story on TV last night, and it moved me. I've been through some really dark times, and I've been wondering if things would ever get better. But seeing what you've achieved gives me hope. Maybe I can do something for myself too. Can you help me?" Jake stared at the screen for a long moment. He was used to business emails, product updates, and media inquiries. But this message was different. It wasn't about business. It was about people. Real people who were facing real challenges. Later that day, Jake sat down with his team. He had something important to say. "I've been thinking a lot about the next steps, and it's not just about pushing the product anymore," Jake said, his voice serious but filled with resolve. "We've built something incredible, but I want to do more. I want to give back. I want to create a platform for people like Lily, the ones who need a second chance. I've been there. I know what it's like to feel like the world is against you, and I want to be part of the change." The room was silent for a moment. Then one of Jake's team members, Sarah, spoke up. "That's a bold move, Jake," she said, a thoughtful look on her face. "But I think you're right. We've done a lot, but there's always more we can do. You're already an inspiration. Imagine if we could use this platform to help others like you." Jake smiled. "That's exactly what I'm thinking. I want to create a program that helps people, whether it's through job training, mentorship, or giving them the resources they need to start their own businesses. It's time we make a difference beyond just profits." The team was on board. They started brainstorming ideas for what this program could look like: mentorship sessions, scholarships, a network for people to connect with each other. Jake knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to put in the work. A few weeks later, Jake stood on the stage at a charity event, speaking to a room full of entrepreneurs, investors, and community leaders. The event wasn't just about raising money. It was about spreading a message. "I've been lucky," Jake began, his voice steady. "I had the chance to work hard, to fight for something better. But not everyone gets that chance. Some people don't have the resources or the support they need to even get started. That's why we're here tonight. We're not just raising money for a company. We're raising hope for people who need it the most." The crowd applauded, and Jake felt a wave of pride wash over him. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope for those who had none. He had created something that was changing lives, not just through the product, but through the people he was helping along the way. As the event continued, Jake noticed a familiar face in the crowd, Lily. She had come to the event with her daughter, and when Jake saw her, he felt a sense of fulfillment. She had reached out to him months ago, unsure of what her future held. Now, here she was, standing in the crowd, smiling, a look of determination in her eyes. After the event, Jake made his way over to Lily. "I'm so glad you could make it," Jake said, shaking her hand. "Thank you, Jake," Lily replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't think I would have made it this far without your encouragement. I've started my own small business, and things are starting to look up. I just wanted to say thank you." Jake smiled, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. "You did the hard work, Lily. I just pointed you in the right direction. But I'm proud of you." Lily's eyes sparkled. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me that it's possible to rebuild from nothing. And now I'm showing my daughter that anything is possible too." Jake watched as Lily walked away, her daughter by her side. He felt a lump in his throat. This was what it was all about. This was the ripple effect. Every life he touched, every person he helped, was now going on to help others. It was a chain reaction of change, and it was just beginning. As Jake returned to his office that evening, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was another message, this one from one of the investors. "Jake, we've been impressed by your commitment to helping others. I think it's time we take this to the next level. Let's meet and discuss expanding this initiative globally." Jake couldn't help but smile. The vision he had started with had grown far beyond what he had imagined. What had begun as a personal journey, fighting against the odds, building a business, had now turned into something bigger. It was about helping others rise, about creating opportunities, and about changing lives. Jake knew there was still a long road ahead, but now, more than ever, he felt ready for whatever came next. The message from his investor had set a new wave of energy through Jake. Expanding his initiative globally was an ambitious proposition, but it felt like the next natural step. The thought of helping people around the world who had been in his position, who had been homeless, lost, or unsure of their futures, filled him with purpose. His venture was no longer just about growing a company. It was about spreading a message of hope, empowerment, and the possibility of second chances. He immediately set up a meeting with the investor. As he sat across the table from them, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and nerves. This was it. This was the moment that could propel everything he had worked for into something far greater. "We've been watching your work, Jake," the investor, Mark, said. "The product is doing well, but it's your personal story and what you're doing to help others that's really caught our attention. We think you can make a global impact. But you'll need to think big. This is a multi-million-dollar endeavor. Are you ready for that?" Jake took a deep breath. The stakes had never been higher. But after everything he had gone through, after all the struggles he'd faced and overcome, he was ready. He nodded confidently. "I've been through the worst, Mark. I've been at rock bottom, and I know what it feels like to wonder if there's any way out. But now, I have the chance to make a real difference, to help people who need it. I'm ready." Mark leaned forward, a smile crossing his face. "That's the attitude we need. Let's take this global." The next few months were a blur. Jake's company was expanding at a rapid pace, and with the support of his investors, he was able to build partnerships with international organizations, nonprofits, and social enterprises. The mission was clear: create opportunities for those who needed them most, especially homeless teens and marginalized groups, by offering them the tools, training, and support they needed to start anew. Jake found himself traveling more than he had ever imagined. From New York to London, Paris to Tokyo, he was meeting with stakeholders and attending international conferences. But no matter how far he traveled or how many meetings he attended, his mind always returned to his purpose, to the people whose lives he was working to change. In every city, he heard stories that reminded him of his own journey. There were people like Lily, who had found a way to rise, to rebuild. But there were also those who hadn't yet found their way. Jake knew that the work ahead would be difficult, that there were many people still waiting for their chance. One evening, after a long day of meetings in Paris, Jake sat in his hotel room, reflecting. He looked out the window at the city, a city that had once seemed so distant from his own reality. It was a far cry from the street corners he used to roam, the places where he had once felt invisible. Now, as he looked out at the glittering lights of Paris, he realized that his journey wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something far bigger. It was about igniting a global movement. The next big step was launching the first international phase of his program, an initiative that would provide funding, mentorship, and job training for homeless teens around the world. The goal was simple: to offer the same opportunities he had been given, to give others the chance to change their circumstances. When the program officially launched, Jake was there to witness the impact firsthand. He traveled to a shelter in London where he met with young people who had been living on the streets for months or even years. Their faces were full of uncertainty, but also hope, a hope that had been ignited by the idea that someone cared enough to offer them a chance. One young woman, a 17-year-old named Emily, caught Jake's attention. She had been living on the streets for over a year after running away from an abusive home. When she first joined the program, she had little hope for her future. But after a few months of training and mentorship, Emily's demeanor had changed. She now spoke with confidence, and Jake could see the fire in her eyes. "Jake, I can't even begin to explain how much this program has changed my life," Emily said, her voice full of gratitude. "I was ready to give up before. I thought there was no way out. But now, I have a job offer, and I've found a purpose again. This is more than just a program, it's a lifeline." Jake felt his heart swell with pride. This was why he had started all of this. It wasn't just about making money or growing a business. It was about changing lives. Emily's transformation was just one example, but it was a powerful one. It was proof that with the right support, anyone could turn their life around. Back in the United States, Jake's team was growing, and his company was thriving. But he knew that success came with its own set of challenges. As the initiative expanded, so did the responsibilities. There were constant logistical hurdles, growing competition, and the pressure to keep delivering on his promises. One afternoon, as Jake was reviewing the latest reports in his office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Trump. "Jake, I've been following your progress. I'm impressed. But I have one piece of advice for you. Never stop pushing forward. You've come a long way, but there's always more to be done. Stay hungry. Keep fighting." Jake smiled as he read the message. Trump's words always had a way of grounding him, of reminding him of what was truly important. It wasn't just about the numbers, the deals, or the recognition. It was about the impact, about the lives he was changing. And that was what kept Jake going. As Jake continued his journey of expansion, he began to feel the weight of his success pressing down on him. His company was flourishing, his initiative was gaining traction, and his mission to help homeless teens around the world was evolving into a global movement. But with this rapid growth came new challenges, challenges that threatened to pull him in every direction. The demands of running a multinational organization were staggering. There were constant meetings, travel, and decisions that had to be made on a daily basis. The financial stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was intense. The team needed him to be the guiding force, the visionary who had once risen from nothing. But deep down, Jake began to wonder, was he losing sight of why he started all of this in the first place? His days became a blur of numbers, deadlines, and endless to-do lists. In between meetings, he would try to call his family, but even those conversations felt rushed and disconnected. He missed the days when his focus was clearer, when the goal was simple: help those who needed it most. Now, it seemed like every decision had a price, whether it was personal or financial. One afternoon, Jake found himself staring at a blank wall in his office, his mind racing. He had just come from a high-stakes meeting with investors, where they had pushed for quicker returns and more aggressive marketing strategies. The pressure was suffocating. They didn't seem to care about the mission, they only cared about the numbers. And yet, they held the key to the next phase of expansion. It wasn't just the investors. The media, too, was beginning to turn up the heat. Stories about his company's success were everywhere, but so were the critiques. Was Jake really living up to the promises he had made to the homeless youth he was helping? Was the focus on profit overshadowing the mission? Were they making a real difference, or was it all just a facade? That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind spinning. He got up, grabbed his phone, and began scrolling through the messages he had received over the past few weeks. There were countless success stories from people who had been impacted by the program, just like Emily, who had found a job and a new sense of purpose. But then there were also messages filled with doubt, criticism, and questions. Was Jake becoming too corporate? Was he forgetting where he came from? He thought back to his early days, living on the streets, feeling lost and desperate. He remembered the people who had helped him, who had given him a chance when no one else would. He had promised himself that if he ever made it out, he would do the same for others. But now, as he sat in his office, staring at the glowing screen, he wondered if he was losing sight of that promise. The next day, Jake decided to take a step back. He called an impromptu meeting with his core team. As they gathered around the table, Jake could see the concern in their eyes. They had noticed the shift in him, the exhaustion, the distant look. They knew something was off, but they didn't know how to help. "I've been thinking a lot," Jake began, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I've been so focused on growing the company, expanding the initiative, and hitting targets that I've lost sight of the core reason we started all of this. It's not just about numbers. It's about real people, real lives. And I don't want to lose that." The room was silent for a moment before Sarah, his right-hand woman, spoke up. "Jake, we all know you're doing this for the right reasons. But you're only human. The pressure you're facing is intense. But we've got your back. We're all in this together. You don't have to carry it all alone." Jake let out a sigh of relief. "I appreciate that. I just feel like I'm at a crossroads. We've come so far, but I don't want to lose myself in the process. I need to remember why I started this, and make sure that we stay true to our mission, no matter how big we get." The team nodded in agreement, and together, they began to brainstorm ways to refocus the company's mission. It wasn't about sacrificing growth. It was about ensuring that their core values remained at the forefront of everything they did. A few days later, Jake found himself in a quiet park, sitting alone on a bench. The weather was calm, and the sound of children laughing in the distance reminded him of simpler times. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The world seemed to slow down for just a moment. In that stillness, Jake realized something important. The pressure, the expectations, the constant noise. It had all been clouding his vision. He needed to find balance, to reconnect with the reason he had started all of this in the first place. His journey had always been about hope, second chances, and fighting against the odds. No amount of success or financial gain could take that away. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily, the young woman he had helped in the early days of his initiative. "Jake, I just wanted to thank you again for everything. Your program gave me a chance, and I now have a steady job and a future. I'm starting my own business, and I'm so excited about what's next. I don't know where I would be without your help." Jake smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. This was why he had done it all, to make a difference in people's lives. And no matter how big the company became, or how much money flowed in, that would always be the driving force behind everything. That night, Jake returned to his office with a renewed sense of purpose. He had learned a valuable lesson. That success wasn't just about achieving the next milestone. It was about staying true to who you were and remembering why you started. His vision for the future was clear: to help others rise, to create a legacy of hope and empowerment, and to always put people before profits. Jake's renewed sense of purpose was exactly what he needed, but the world around him didn't slow down. In fact, the pressure to succeed continued to mount. As his program grew, it became more complex, and with that complexity came unforeseen challenges. The team was expanding, new partnerships were forming, and Jake was getting more media attention than ever. What had once been a small initiative was now a global movement, and with it came a set of expectations that weighed heavily on his shoulders. One morning, as Jake was going through his emails, a subject line caught his attention: "Urgent. Crisis in one of our international programs." His stomach churned as he opened the message. The email described a critical situation in one of their overseas initiatives in Brazil, where a shelter they had partnered with had suddenly shut down, leaving dozens of homeless teens without resources or support. This was the last thing Jake wanted to hear. Brazil had been one of the first countries they'd expanded into, and the results had been promising. Now, it seemed like everything was unraveling. The shelter's closure was due to a combination of financial mismanagement and local political challenges. The teens who had been enrolled in the program were now at risk of losing their jobs, their housing, and the opportunity to build a better future. Jake knew he had to act fast. He couldn't afford to let this setback derail everything they had worked so hard for. He immediately called a meeting with Sarah, the operations manager, and asked her to gather all the necessary information about the situation. His mind raced as he considered the possible solutions. Could they find a new shelter? Could they save the program? As the team discussed the crisis, Jake felt a surge of anxiety. The problems in Brazil were just one example of the many challenges that came with expanding at this pace. How could they maintain the quality of their programs while growing so quickly? Were they spreading themselves too thin? Later that day, Jake received a call from an unexpected source. It was President Trump. "Jake, I've been hearing about the situation in Brazil," Trump said, his tone direct but sympathetic. "You're doing great things, but I know it's tough when you're operating on a global scale. I've been through similar challenges myself. The key is to take control, get in front of the problem, and don't let it knock you down. This is just a bump in the road. You'll figure it out." Jake appreciated the words of encouragement, but he still felt the weight of the situation. He had always been able to rely on his instincts, but this felt different. This wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about maintaining the integrity of the entire initiative. He couldn't afford to let his vision falter now. "I'm working on it, Mr. President," Jake replied, "but it's a tough one. The shelter's closure puts everything at risk. I don't know if we can salvage the program there." Trump's response was firm. "You've come this far, Jake. Don't back down now. Get your team together and make it happen. You're a fighter, and the world needs more people like you." Determined to find a solution, Jake and Sarah spent the next few days organizing calls with local officials, potential new shelter providers, and nonprofit organizations that could offer support. It was a whirlwind of phone calls and emails, but Jake felt a sense of urgency and resolve that pushed him forward. He had built this program to offer second chances, and that included finding ways to overcome obstacles like this one. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of the issue in Brazil, and soon, Jake found himself fielding calls from reporters. The stories that began to circulate focused on the shelter's closure and the uncertainty facing the teens involved. Some articles were critical of the program's ability to manage such a large-scale international effort, questioning whether they were in over their heads. Jake knew that the media's attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it brought more visibility to the program. On the other, it also put pressure on him to deliver results in real time. The negative coverage was disheartening, but it also galvanized Jake to fight even harder. This was his mission, and he wasn't about to let setbacks define it. After days of intense work, Jake and Sarah were able to secure a partnership with a new shelter in Brazil. The new shelter, although smaller, was better managed and had strong connections with local organizations that could provide the support the teens needed. It was a temporary solution, but it bought them time to build a more sustainable program in Brazil. Jake was relieved, but the experience had taught him a valuable lesson. Growth required constant vigilance and adaptability. Things wouldn't always go according to plan, but as long as he remained true to his mission, there was always a way forward. In the midst of the crisis, Jake received a message from Emily, the young woman in London who had found a job through the program. Her message read, "Jake, I just wanted to update you. I've started my own small business, and I'm doing well. None of this would have been possible without the help of the program. Thank you for giving me a chance." Jake felt a wave of gratitude wash over him as he read the message. It was moments like these that reminded him why he was doing all of this. Even when the world seemed to be full of obstacles, there were lives being changed for the better. Emily was living proof that their work mattered, and that kept him going. That night, after a long day of meetings and calls, Jake sat at his desk, reflecting on everything that had happened. Brazil had been a major setback, but it had also been a turning point. He now understood more clearly than ever that success wasn't just about growth, it was about resilience. The path to making a real difference was rarely smooth, and there would always be bumps along the way. But the key was to stay the course, even when things got tough. With that thought in mind, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just building a company or an initiative, he was building something that would outlast him, something that could change lives for generations to come. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would keep pushing forward. With the crisis in Brazil behind him, Jake felt as though he had earned a hard-won victory. Yet, as the weeks passed, new challenges continued to emerge. While the program had managed to stay afloat, the weight of running such a massive, multinational initiative was heavier than ever. What had once been a dream of helping a few homeless teens had now grown into a vast, complex global network, and Jake couldn't help but wonder if he had outgrown the vision he'd started with. The stakes had become higher. There were new regions to expand into, new partnerships to manage, and increased scrutiny from the public. Every decision, every action, had consequences that rippled through the network. There were moments of triumph, like the successful reopening of the Brazil program, but there were also countless moments of doubt. One morning, as Jake was reviewing reports, his assistant knocked on his door. "Jake, you've got a meeting with an international foundation in an hour. They've heard about the work you're doing and are interested in partnering." Jake rubbed his eyes, feeling the fatigue from the constant whirlwind of activities. He had barely processed the recent successes, and now, another opportunity was knocking at the door. He had learned the hard way that growth brought with it not only excitement but also pressure. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't afford to turn down potential partnerships that could expand the program's reach and impact. "All right, thank you. Let them know I'll be ready," Jake said, forcing a smile. He quickly gathered his thoughts and prepared for the meeting. The foundation that had reached out was one of the largest global humanitarian organizations. A partnership with them could significantly increase the program's resources and help more homeless youth worldwide. The meeting began with a formal introduction and some discussion about the foundation's mission, but it quickly turned to Jake's initiative. The representatives were eager to learn more about the specifics, how the program operated, its financials, and most importantly, how it would align with the foundation's global goals. "Jake," the foundation's director said, leaning forward, "we've been following your program closely, and it's clear that you've made incredible strides. We're interested in supporting your work on a larger scale, especially as you expand into new regions. However, there's one thing we need to know. How do you plan to maintain the integrity of the program as you scale? How will you ensure that it doesn't become another corporate initiative that loses sight of its original purpose? Jake felt his chest tighten. This was the question he had been fearing. The concern about the program losing its heart as it grew was valid. It had been something he struggled with every day. He had worked tirelessly to keep the program grounded in the values of empowerment, second chances, and community. But now, as the pressure to expand and generate profit mounted, he couldn't help but wonder if he was truly staying true to those values. After a long pause, Jake took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. I believe that growth and integrity don't have to be mutually exclusive. Yes, we're scaling fast, but our mission remains the same: to provide a future for homeless teens. Every dollar we raise, every partnership we form, goes back into making that mission a reality. And as we expand, we're committed to keeping the voices of the young people we help at the forefront of everything we do. If we ever lose sight of that, then we've lost everything. The director nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate your honesty, Jake. That's exactly what we want to hear. We don't want this to be a numbers game. We want to see real impact. And from what we've seen, your program has the potential to do just that. The meeting ended on a positive note, and Jake couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. He had faced a tough question head-on and was able to answer with conviction. But as he walked back to his office, his mind raced. Was he really doing enough to preserve the soul of the program? The growth was exciting, but what if they lost touch with the very people they were trying to help? He had worked so hard to get here, but the cost of success sometimes felt overwhelming. Later that evening, Jake took a walk around the city to clear his mind. He passed by a group of teens sitting on a bench, laughing together. They were surrounded by a sense of camaraderie, the kind of support that Jake had once longed for when he was homeless. He paused for a moment, watching them. These were the faces he had worked so hard to reach, the ones who were just beginning to understand the possibility of a better future. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily, the young woman who had started her own business. Jake, I just wanted to let you know that I'm now mentoring others in the program. I never thought I'd be in this position, but here I am, helping others the way I was helped. Thank you for changing my life. Jake felt a surge of pride as he read her message. It wasn't just about helping one person. It was about creating a ripple effect. Emily was giving back, and that was the real success. It was moments like these that reminded Jake why he couldn't give up, no matter how difficult the journey became. The next day, Jake sat down with his leadership team to discuss the upcoming partnership with the International Foundation. They had a lot to consider. How would the increased funding be allocated? What new markets should they enter next? But for Jake, the most important question was how they could keep the program's core values intact as they scaled. We need to make sure we're always listening to the kids we're helping, Jake said. Their voices are what got us here, and they need to continue guiding us. We can't let the pressure to expand cloud our mission. We need to be more intentional than ever. Sarah, his operations manager, nodded in agreement. We've built something amazing here, and we need to protect it. Growth is great, but we need to ensure that every decision we make aligns with our mission. Jake looked around at his team. They were the backbone of the organization, the ones who kept the program running smoothly. They understood the importance of staying true to the mission, just as he did. With their help, he felt confident that they could navigate the complexities of expansion without losing sight of what truly mattered. Jake woke up early the next morning, the usual quiet hum of the city filling his ears as the sun began to rise. He had a routine now, early morning runs, followed by a quick coffee, and then straight into the day's grind. The exhaustion that had started to settle in from the intense workload hadn't dissipated, but something had shifted within him. As the world around him continued to speed up, he had come to realize that he was standing at a critical juncture in his journey. He was at the crossroads of personal growth, professional achievement, and an unwavering commitment to his mission. Over the past few months, things had grown beyond his wildest dreams. With the International Foundation partnership underway and new resources pouring into the program, it seemed like nothing could stand in their way. Yet, the pressure was immense. There was a constant balancing act between scaling the program, maintaining its integrity, and ensuring that the teenagers they helped weren't lost in the process. But a conversation with Emily had sparked something in Jake. She had started mentoring other young people who had come through the program. It wasn't just her success story, it was the fact that she was now able to pay it forward. That's what Jake had wanted all along. A self-sustaining cycle of support where those who had been helped could return the favor and help others. It made everything they had done feel truly worthwhile. As he sat at his desk in the office later that morning, reviewing the progress reports for the new projects they were taking on, his phone buzzed. He glanced down and saw that it was a message from an old friend, Chris, someone he had known since his days on the streets. "Hey man, long time no talk. I've been following your work. You're doing big things. I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard from Chris in years. When they had parted ways, Jake had always wondered what happened to him. They'd shared some tough times together, and Jake had often hoped Chris had found his own path. Curious and a bit anxious, Jake quickly replied, "Of course. When and where?" Chris texted back quickly, "I'm in town for the next few days. Can we meet at the cafe on 5th? Noon?" Jake agreed, his mind racing with questions. What could Chris want to discuss? And why had he reached out now, after all this time? At noon, Jake arrived at the cafe, and as he walked inside, he spotted Chris right away. The man had aged, of course, as anyone did, but there was something about him that still felt familiar. They exchanged a quick hug, and Chris motioned for Jake to sit down. "Good to see you, Jake," Chris said, his voice warm but a little strained, as if something was on his mind. He ran a hand through his hair, and then looked at Jake seriously. "I've been watching you. What you're doing, it's incredible. But man, I need your help." Jake frowned slightly, sensing the urgency in Chris' tone. "Of course, what's going on?" Chris took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been clean for a while, doing the best I can, but I've hit a wall. I've been working jobs here and there, nothing major, but I can't seem to break out of the cycle. I've tried, but things keep pulling me back. And I see you, and I see what you've built, and I know there's a way out, but I don't know how to get there on my own. You always had this ability to see something bigger, to believe things could change. I need that now." Jake sat quietly for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the situation. Chris had always been someone who could talk a good game, but to hear him admit he was struggling was sobering. Jake had been where Chris was, feeling stuck, unsure if a way out even existed. The weight of Chris' words pressed on him. He had spent so much of his time helping others, expanding the program, taking on more challenges. Now, someone from his past was asking for his help. Chris' eyes met his, and Jake could see the raw vulnerability in them. "Jake, I know what you've built is bigger now. And I know it's not just about giving people handouts, it's about giving them a chance. I don't need charity, man. I just need that chance." Jake felt a rush of emotions, compassion, guilt, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility. Here was someone he had once walked alongside, and now he was asking for the very thing Jake had spent his life working to give to others. A second chance? "I can't promise you an easy answer, Chris," Jake said softly, his voice filled with empathy. "But I can promise you that I'll help you find your way. If you're ready to put in the work, I'll help you get there." Chris nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I've always trusted you, Jake. You were always the one who showed me that life could be different, even when everything else seemed impossible." Over the next few weeks, Jake worked closely with Chris, helping him navigate the complexities of the program. He connected Chris with a mentor who had once been in his shoes, someone who had also come from the streets and had successfully built a new life. Chris was a hard worker, but the emotional scars from his past often held him back. Jake made sure to check in with him regularly, offering guidance, encouragement, and most importantly, unwavering support. The change wasn't immediate, but it was evident. Chris started to regain his confidence. He began attending the program's leadership development workshops, where he learned essential skills to rebuild his life. Slowly, the man who had once felt lost in the world began to find his way again. Jake watched it all unfold with a mix of pride and humility. It wasn't easy. There were days when Chris stumbled, when the old patterns seemed impossible to break. But the fact that Chris was willing to keep going, to keep fighting, reminded Jake of the core reason he had started the program in the first place. One evening, as Jake was walking out of the office, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Emily. "Jake, I just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking of starting my own outreach program to help kids who've been through what I've been through. I want to give back in the same way you did for me." Jake's heart swelled with pride. It was one of those moments where he realized that what they had built was bigger than just him, bigger than even the program itself. It was a movement, a cycle of transformation, and it was beginning to take on a life of its own. As the weeks rolled on, Jake felt the weight of the mission growing heavier. The more people he helped, the more he realized how much more there was to do. The global expansion of the program was moving forward at a rapid pace, and there were moments when it felt like the world was opening up to them. Yet, with every success, a new challenge seemed to arise. But amidst the whirlwind of work, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was happening. What had started as a personal quest to help one young person had snowballed into something far more significant. The initiative had turned into a global force, and yet the impact it was having on the people involved, on him, on his team, and on the teens they were trying to help, was far beyond anything he had ever expected. One evening, Jake was having dinner with his team, talking about the future and the upcoming projects. Sarah, his operations manager, sat next to him, a rare smile on her face. She had always been the one to keep everything running smoothly, the one to remind him of the bigger picture when he got lost in the details. "Jake, she said thoughtfully between bites, "this thing, what we're building, it's not just about helping people get out of homelessness. It's about rebuilding lives from the ground up. You're doing something no one has ever tried before." Jake leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "I don't know if I agree, Sarah. Sure, we're helping people, but sometimes I feel like we're just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. There's so much more that needs to be done." Sarah shook her head. "It's easy to feel that way when you're so close to it. But think about how far we've come. We're seeing real transformation. People like Chris and Emily, they're proof that it works. You're showing people how to live, how to thrive, not just survive." Jake thought about that for a moment. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe he had been so focused on the long-term goal that he had forgotten to appreciate the victories in front of him. It wasn't just about the statistics or the size of the program. It was about the real lives they were touching every single day. As the program continued to expand globally, Jake found himself traveling more often. He had always been one to stay close to the heart of the operation, but now the reality of the scope of the initiative forced him to be on the move constantly. Every new country they entered brought a new set of challenges, but also new opportunities. It was thrilling, but exhausting. One day, while he was on a flight to London, Jake found himself staring out the window, contemplating everything he had been through to get to this point. He had come a long way from the streets. He had found his purpose in helping others, but there were times when he wondered if he was losing touch with the things that had mattered to him in the beginning. His thoughts were interrupted by a text message from Chris. It had been a few weeks since they had last spoken, and Jake had been waiting to hear how he was doing. "I got a job," Chris wrote. "I'm working at a construction site. It's hard, but I'm doing it. I've never felt better. Thanks for not giving up on me, Jake." Jake's heart swelled with pride. Chris had come so far, and seeing him take responsibility for his own life was one of the most fulfilling moments Jake had experienced in this journey. It was the ultimate proof that the program was working, that the cycle of helping others could continue. But there was another message waiting for him on his phone, this one from Emily. "I've got something I need to talk to you about, Jake. Can we meet soon?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. Emily had been thriving in the program, and the last he heard, she was considering starting her own outreach initiative to help other kids. But this message sounded different, and Jake couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. He quickly typed back, "Of course, when works for you." A few days later, Jake met Emily at a small cafe in the heart of the city. She looked different, more confident than he had ever seen her, and her eyes sparkled with a sense of purpose. It was clear that the work she had done to rebuild her life was starting to take root. "Jake, I've been thinking a lot about what you've done for me," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You didn't just help me get a job or a place to stay. You showed me that I had value. You gave me the tools to believe in myself. And now, I want to do that for others. I want to start a program to help kids who are in the same situation I was. But there's something else I need to talk to you about. Jake raised an eyebrow. What's going on, Emily? Emily hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke. I've been offered a job with the global team. They want me to lead the expansion in South America. It's a huge opportunity, and I'm excited, but I also don't want to leave what I've built here. I'm torn, Jake. I feel like I can make a real difference in South America, but I don't want to abandon the kids I've been working with here. I've found a purpose, and I don't want to lose it. Jake listened intently, his heart swelling with pride for Emily. She had come so far, and now she was in a position to make an impact on an even bigger scale. But he could see the conflict in her eyes. I can't tell you what to do, Emily, Jake said, his voice soft but steady. But I know this. You're going to do great things no matter where you are. You've already proven that you have what it takes. The question is, where do you think you can make the most impact? Emily sat back in her chair, staring out the window as she pondered the decision. Jake could see the weight of it all on her shoulders. It was a pivotal moment in her life, one that could shape her future in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. The conversation left Jake deep in thought. Emily was facing a crossroads, much like he had when he first started the program. And while he couldn't make the decision for her, he knew that wherever she went, she would continue to inspire others, just as she had inspired him. Later that evening, Jake sat down at his desk, staring at the stack of emails, reports, and partnership requests that had piled up. He had always believed in the power of second chances, and now he was beginning to realize that the real work wasn't just in expanding the program. It was in helping people find their own path. The success of the initiative was no longer just measured by the number of teens they helped, but by the way those teens were going on to change the world. The days flew by, and the pressure of balancing the global expansion with personal commitments began to feel like an unrelenting wave. Jake found himself constantly juggling meetings, phone calls, and progress reports, each task more demanding than the last. But he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction in seeing how far everything had come. It wasn't just the growth of the program or the success of the partnerships. It was the real, tangible change in the lives of people he cared about. Emily was thriving in her new role, helping others in South America. Chris had fully embraced his new life, working hard and slowly building a future for himself. And then there was the message he received one night, which set off a chain of events that would change everything. It was late when Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen to see a message from Sarah. Jake, we've got a situation. The foundation in Europe is facing a major financial crisis. They're about to lose their funding, and without it, we risk losing the impact we've worked so hard for. Can we talk tomorrow? Jake sat still for a moment, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. Europe had been one of their biggest success stories, and the thought of it unraveling was unsettling. He immediately texted back, "Yes, call me first thing tomorrow. Let's figure this out." The following morning, Sarah walked into Jake's office, her expression serious. She didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "Jake, the situation is critical. We have 3 major donors pulling out in the next 2 weeks, and without the funding, we're looking at shutting down operations in Europe. If we don't act fast, we could lose all the momentum we've gained over the past year. The teens there, the staff, it could all fall apart." Jake leaned forward in his chair, his mind racing. The enormity of the problem felt almost suffocating. The program had come so far. This setback was unthinkable. He had invested so much of his energy into building the foundation, and the idea that it might crumble was hard to process. "Do we have any leads on new donors?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "We've reached out to a few, but it's going to take time." "Time we don't have," Sarah replied, her voice tight with frustration. "We may have to make some tough decisions, Jake." Jake's mind flashed back to all the people he had worked with over the years, the faces of the teens whose lives had been changed by this program. The thought of them losing that chance was unbearable. "I'm not willing to give up on this. We've come too far," Jake said, his voice steady but firm. "Let's figure out how we can save it." In the days that followed, Jake threw himself into saving the European branch. He contacted every donor, potential partner, and investor he could think of. The emails were relentless, the phone calls even more so. But the more he tried to resolve the crisis, the more it became clear that their financial structure was built on a house of cards. Without the funding, they couldn't continue to support their programs, let alone expand. It was during a late-night brainstorming session that Jake had an idea, an unconventional one, but one that might just work. He picked up the phone and dialed Emily. "Hey, Jake, what's up?" she answered, her voice bright despite the late hour. "I need your help," Jake said, his voice laced with urgency. "The program in Europe is in serious trouble. We're about to lose everything. I need to know. Can you bring your outreach team together, maybe create a social media campaign that can rally people behind the cause?" Emily was silent for a moment. "I'm not sure how much impact we can have on such short notice, but I'll do whatever I can. If it means saving what we've built, I'm in." Jake let out a breath of relief. "Thanks, Emily. You've got a gift for connecting with people. We need that right now." The next few days were a whirlwind. Emily's team worked tirelessly, using their collective skills to craft a compelling social media campaign that spread the word about the European crisis. The hashtag Save the Foundation took off, and soon, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of supporters from around the world shared their stories, showing how the program had impacted their lives and the lives of their loved ones. The media took notice, and the public's outpouring of support became the spark that reignited the foundation's momentum. Donors who had previously been hesitant began reaching out, offering new funding and partnerships to keep the program alive. By the end of the week, things had started to turn around. The European branch had secured enough funding to continue its operations, and the impact of the global community rallying behind the cause had reignited the team's spirit. As Jake sat in his office, catching his breath after the intense days of phone calls, emails, and strategizing, he couldn't help but smile. The crisis had been averted, but it had also highlighted something deeper: the power of community. The ripple effect of their work was real, and when people came together, they could move mountains. It was the kind of reminder Jake needed. He wasn't alone in this journey. The teens, the team, and the supporters, they were all part of something bigger. And while the journey was far from over, Jake felt more confident than ever that they were on the right path. Later that evening, Emily sent Jake a text. "We did it. Europe is saved. Thank you for believing in us." Jake smiled as he typed back, "No, thank you. You all saved it. This is just the beginning." As the weeks went by, the program not only survived but thrived. The momentum from the social media campaign carried them into new territories, with more support than they had ever imagined. They had managed to turn a crisis into an opportunity, and it was clear that this was just the start of something bigger. Jake was more convinced than ever that the key to success wasn't just about building a program. It was about creating a community that supported, uplifted, and believed in one another. The ripple effect had spread far beyond Europe, and now it was touching lives all over the world. But Jake knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about the numbers or the success of the program. It was about the lives they were changing, and that, he realized, was the true measure of their success. The momentum from the crisis in Europe had begun to stabilize, but Jake knew that the world they were building was fragile. There were still so many challenges ahead. As the program grew, so did the complexity of their operations. While Emily's success with the social media campaign had been a game-changer, Jake realized they needed a solid plan to sustain the progress. As the weeks passed, Jake found himself facing a dilemma. How could they keep the momentum alive without relying too much on emergency responses? How could they create a model that was sustainable, one that didn't depend on external crises to drive growth? It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when Jake received an unexpected call. The name on his screen was unfamiliar: David Harris, a well-known entrepreneur in the tech world. Jake hesitated for a moment, but decided to answer. "Hello?" Jake asked, still trying to place the name. "Jake, it's David Harris. I know we haven't met, but I've been following your program for some time now. I'm impressed with what you're doing, especially how you've been able to scale globally. I believe I can help you take this to the next level." Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "What kind of help are we talking about?" David paused before speaking. "I've seen firsthand the challenges nonprofits face when it comes to financial stability. I run a firm that specializes in helping organizations like yours build sustainable, scalable business models. I believe we could partner to create something that doesn't just rely on donations or occasional viral campaigns. I want to help you build a model that ensures your work continues to thrive." Jake leaned back in his chair, processing David's words. It was rare to receive such an unsolicited offer, but the timing couldn't have been more perfect. The program had grown quickly, but the financial pressure was mounting. They needed a long-term plan. "Let's talk," Jake said finally. "But I'll be honest with you, David. We've worked hard to build a program based on trust and community. I won't compromise those values just to get funding." David's voice was calm but confident. "I understand, Jake, and I don't intend to change what you've built. My goal is to help you sustain it, to build a business model that supports your mission without losing the essence of what you're doing." A few days later, Jake flew to meet David in person. David's office was sleek and modern, the walls adorned with accolades and awards. But there was a sense of humility in his demeanor that Jake found refreshing. Despite his success, David didn't come across as a typical corporate executive. He seemed genuinely interested in helping. Over coffee, David laid out his vision. "What if I told you that there's a way to create a revenue stream without relying on outside donors? A way to generate income that could fund your operations, pay your team, and allow you to reinvest in the community?" Jake was intrigued but wary. "You're talking about some sort of business venture?" David nodded. "Exactly. A social enterprise model. It would allow you to generate income by creating a service or product that aligns with your mission. For example, your outreach program could create mentorship packages, sell educational resources, or offer consulting services to other nonprofits. These efforts would allow you to raise funds without sacrificing your core values." Jake considered the idea carefully. "So, you're suggesting that we diversify our income stream while still staying true to the heart of what we're doing?" David smiled. "Exactly. And with my team's expertise, we can help you design and implement a plan that minimizes risk and maximizes impact." Jake took a deep breath. This was the kind of support he had been looking for, someone who understood the complexities of running a nonprofit at scale and could provide strategic guidance without compromising the values they had worked so hard to establish. But the thought of venturing into business, of transforming their community-driven initiative into something more commercial, made him nervous. "I'm not sure," Jake said after a long pause. "It's one thing to grow a program, but another to start turning it into a business. What if it changes the culture we've built? What if it feels like we're selling out?" David leaned forward, his voice sincere. "I get it. I'm not asking you to give up what you've built. What I'm offering is a way to make it even stronger. You can maintain the essence of your mission while making it more sustainable. We'll work together to ensure that your community stays at the forefront of everything you do." Jake's mind was spinning. He needed time to think, to process everything David was offering. But there was no denying the opportunity before him. He had always wanted to ensure the program's future, and if this was the way to do it, he was willing to consider it. "I'll think about it," Jake said, feeling the weight of the decision. "This is a huge step, David. It could change everything." David stood up and extended his hand. "Take all the time you need. But just know, I'm here to help. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." As Jake made his way back to the hotel that evening, his mind raced. Could they really integrate a business model into their nonprofit structure without losing the heart of their mission? It felt like walking a fine line. On the one hand, the financial stability that David was offering could change everything. On the other hand, Jake knew how delicate the culture of their program was. They had worked so hard to build trust with the community, and the thought of it becoming commercialized in any way was unsettling. That night, he spent hours staring at his phone, scrolling through old messages from Emily, Chris, and the other teens he had helped. Their words reminded him of why he had started all of this in the first place: to make a real difference, to give people like them the opportunity to change their lives. As Jake lay in bed, he realized that the program was no longer just about him. It was about the countless lives they were touching. If this partnership with David could help them reach even more people, then maybe it was worth exploring. But he needed to be sure, to carefully consider every step. The next day, Jake called Emily. He trusted her opinion more than anyone else's. "Jake, what's going on?" Emily asked, sounding curious. "I've got an opportunity on the table," Jake began, his voice contemplative. "It could secure our future, but it also feels like a big shift. I don't want to lose what we've built. I want to know what you think. Emily paused before responding. Jake, we've always talked about the importance of growth, right? But growth isn't just about size. It's about impact. If this can help us reach more people, then I think it's worth considering. But, just like you, I wouldn't want to change the heart of what we do. Jake nodded, taking in her words. Thanks, Emily. That helps more than you know. As he hung up the phone, Jake knew that whatever decision he made, it would be one that required careful thought. But for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of hope. With the right guidance, they could build something that would last, a legacy that could change lives for generations to come. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jake was no longer afraid of it. The unexpected ally had given him something invaluable, a chance to see the future with new eyes. The days following his conversation with Emily were filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Jake had spent hours researching David Harris's firm, reading testimonials, and reaching out to people who had worked with him in the past. It was clear that David's reputation was solid, and his approach to social enterprises seemed to align with the values of the foundation. Still, there was a part of Jake that hesitated. Could he really make the leap from a community-focused nonprofit to something more commercial without losing the heart of what they had built? Jake knew the decision was his alone to make, but he wasn't prepared to face it in isolation. The team had always been there for him through thick and thin, and now was no different. He scheduled a meeting with the leadership team, the people who had been by his side since the very beginning: Emily, Chris, Sarah, and a few others. It was time to discuss the potential partnership with David Harris and get their input. After all, they were the ones who had worked tirelessly to build the foundation, and their thoughts on the direction were critical. The meeting took place in the conference room of their office, a small but welcoming space. The mood was tense as everyone settled into their seats. Jake could feel the weight of the conversation ahead. He had seen these people work through so many challenges together, but this was different. This was about the future. All right, let's get started, Jake said, his voice steady but with an edge of nervous energy. I've been in talks with David Harris, the entrepreneur I mentioned before. He's made an offer to help us build a more sustainable business model, something that could help us scale without depending so much on donations. Sarah, the finance lead, raised an eyebrow. What kind of model are we talking about here? I'm assuming it's not just about asking people for more money. Jake chuckled, appreciating her directness. Exactly. It's about creating revenue streams that align with what we do: educational resources, mentorship packages, consulting services for other nonprofits. Things like that. It's all about creating long-term financial stability. Chris, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. So, what's the catch? Why is he offering this help? Jake hesitated for a moment, knowing the next part was crucial. David believes that with the right model in place, we could increase our impact. He's been successful in helping other nonprofits scale, and he's offering to guide us through the process. Emily, always thoughtful, spoke up. I can see the potential. If we have a way to fund ourselves, we could reach more people, expand into new regions. But like you, Jake, I worry about what happens if we lose sight of what's important. We've built something here, a culture of community and trust. Can we maintain that if we start thinking like a business? Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words. That's the fear I've been wrestling with. I don't want to lose the heart of what we've built, but at the same time, I can't ignore the reality. If we don't find a way to ensure financial stability, we're always going to be one crisis away from losing it all. Sarah took a deep breath. I think we need to look at this from a financial perspective. Our current model works, but it's not sustainable. It relies too much on outside funding and doesn't generate enough income from within. If we can build something that helps us be self-sufficient, it'll give us more freedom to focus on our mission, not just survival. Chris nodded in agreement. I'm all for the idea of growth. The more people we can help, the better. But I'm with Emily. If we start selling out just to make money, we lose the essence of why we're here. Jake could feel the tension in the room. They were all passionate about the cause, but there was a very real fear of change. He needed to make sure they understood that this wasn't about abandoning the community. It was about protecting it. I get it, Jake said, looking around at his team. This is a big shift, and it's scary. But think about this. If we can create a model that funds itself and allows us to reinvest in our programs, we won't have to depend on people's donations or the next big fundraising event. We can be in control of our future. Emily glanced at the rest of the team. I think we need to explore it more. Let's do some research, maybe even talk to people who've worked with David in the past. We don't have to jump in headfirst without knowing more. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Agreed. I'm not asking anyone to make a decision today. I just wanted to open the conversation and get your thoughts. This is going to take time, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. In the days that followed, the team did exactly what they had promised. They reached out to past clients of David Harris's firm, spoke with people who had used similar models, and dug deep into the financial implications of such a shift. The more they learned, the more it became clear that a partnership with David might be the key to securing the foundation's future. Jake found himself becoming more and more convinced that this was the right move. The foundation was growing, and it was more than just a passion project now. It was a movement. The teens they had helped, the communities they had touched, and the ripple effect they had created. It was too important to let the fear of change hold them back. Finally, after days of research and deliberation, Jake called David. David, I've had some time to think, and after talking with my team, I'm ready to move forward. David's voice came through the line with enthusiasm. That's great to hear, Jake. I'm excited to work with you. We're going to build something that will ensure your mission lasts for years to come. The decision was made, and the partnership began to take shape. With David's expertise in business models and social enterprises, Jake and his team started building the framework for a sustainable future. They worked on creating educational content, launching mentorship programs for other nonprofits, and designing a consulting model that would help them generate revenue while staying true to their mission. As the months went by, the changes began to unfold. The program's financial stability grew, and they were able to reinvest in the communities they served. The foundation had turned the corner. They were no longer just a charity hoping to survive. They were an organization with a plan for long-term impact, one that could reach more people than ever before. But Jake knew that the real measure of their success wasn't in the bottom line or the number of partnerships they secured. It was in the lives they continued to change. Months had passed since Jake made the pivotal decision to partner with David Harris and transition the foundation towards a more sustainable business model. With the help of David's firm, they had successfully implemented a range of revenue-generating initiatives. The mentorship programs were flourishing, educational resources were in high demand, and the consulting arm had gained traction with nonprofits and businesses alike. The future seemed brighter than ever, and Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they had built together. However, amidst all the success and progress, Jake was reminded of the very reason they started in the first place. The lives they were trying to change. It wasn't about the profits, the partnerships, or the recognition. It was about the people they were helping every single day. He could see the positive effects of their work in the teens they had mentored, the families they had supported, and the communities that were slowly starting to thrive. But just as they were finding their footing in this new world, a new challenge emerged that would test everything they had worked so hard to build. It all started one afternoon when Jake received an unexpected call from Emily. There was urgency in her voice, a sharpness that caught him off guard. Jake, you need to hear this. There's something going on, and it could hurt everything we've worked for. Jake's heart skipped a beat. What's happening? What do you mean? I've just gotten wind of some reports that there are people criticizing the direction we've taken. They're questioning whether we've lost sight of our mission, whether we're too focused on revenue generation and not enough on the people we're trying to help. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. Are they serious? I'm afraid so, Emily said. There are whispers in the nonprofit world, and a few former supporters are publicly voicing their concerns. They think we've become too commercialized and are worried that we've abandoned the community-driven model. Jake felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. He had always known that there would be resistance to change, but this felt different. They had worked so hard to maintain the core of the mission, to prove that a social enterprise model could coexist with their values. But now it seemed like everything was on the line. The next few days were filled with tension. Jake's team rallied together to respond to the criticism, drafting statements to explain the thought process behind the new model and how it allowed them to reach more people and provide greater resources. But the criticism didn't stop. It escalated. Social media campaigns were launched by people who once supported the foundation, accusing them of selling out and abandoning their roots. The flood of negative attention began to take a toll on the team. Some of their donors began pulling back, and a few partners questioned their commitment to the community. Jake, feeling the pressure more than ever, called an emergency meeting with his leadership team. "We've got to do something," Jake said, his voice strained with frustration. "I didn't expect this level of backlash. People are accusing us of abandoning everything we've worked for." Emily, who had been working on responding to the critics, spoke up. "I get it, Jake, but the people who are speaking out don't fully understand the reason we made these changes. They don't see the long-term vision. They don't realize that if we don't do this, we won't survive." Chris nodded, adding, "The work we're doing is more important than ever. If we don't evolve, we can't continue to help people. We can't be afraid of the noise." Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, chimed in, "We need to communicate more clearly about our mission. We need to be transparent about how this new model actually empowers us to help more people, not less. It's not about profit for the sake of profit. It's about ensuring sustainability." Jake sighed, looking around the room at his team. They had been through so much together, but this felt like the hardest challenge yet. It wasn't just about the foundation anymore. It was about their personal commitment to a vision, to a belief that they could make a difference in the world. And now, that belief was being tested. That evening, as Jake sat alone in his office, the weight of the situation weighed heavily on him. He couldn't sleep. His phone buzzed with more notifications, more messages from people who had once been staunch supporters of the foundation. Some praised the changes, but many others expressed disillusionment. The tension was palpable, and Jake knew that if they didn't act quickly, they risked losing everything they had worked so hard to build. It was in the midst of his sleeplessness that Jake realized what needed to be done. They needed to confront this head-on. It wasn't enough to just respond to the critics. They had to show the world why their new model was not only sustainable but essential. They needed to demonstrate that they hadn't lost sight of their mission. They had only strengthened it. The next day, Jake called an all-staff meeting. He knew the team had been feeling the strain, but it was time for a bold move. He stood before them, his voice steady, but with a deep conviction that had been building inside him. "Listen, I know we're facing a lot of criticism right now," Jake began, "but I want you all to remember something. We didn't make these changes because we wanted to get rich. We didn't do it for the recognition. We did it because we believe in what we're doing. We believe in the people we're helping. And we believe that if we're going to truly make an impact, we have to be able to sustain ourselves." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I've heard the criticisms. I understand the concerns. But this is our chance to prove that we're not just about surviving, we're about thriving. And we're going to do that by staying true to our core values, while also being smart about how we operate." Jake looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each of his team members. "We are still the same foundation that has been changing lives from day one. We're just doing it in a new way. And together, we will make sure everyone knows that." In the following weeks, the team launched a new awareness campaign to address the criticisms head-on. They focused on sharing success stories from the communities they had helped, showcasing how the revenue generated from their new business model was directly benefiting the people they served. They opened up about their challenges, their growth, and the vision that had guided them all along. The response was overwhelming. Slowly but surely, the critics began to quiet down. Supporters who had initially withdrawn began to return, and new donors were drawn to the authenticity of their message. The foundation had not just weathered the storm, they had come out stronger on the other side. Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The foundation had found a balance between sustainability and mission-driven work. They had faced their biggest challenge yet and emerged victorious. But more than that, Jake realized that the true ripple effect of their success wasn't just in the financial stability they had gained. It was in the lives they continued to change. They had proven that with vision, determination, and a willingness to adapt, anything was possible. The foundation had weathered the storm, but Jake knew that the journey wasn't over. The changes they had made were just the beginning of something bigger. As the foundation continued to grow and expand its influence, Jake found himself reflecting on the broader implications of their work. Every success felt like a step towards something much greater than he had originally envisioned. But despite the success, Jake couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was still something missing. They had achieved financial sustainability, reached more people, and even garnered new support, but at times, it felt as though the heart of their mission had been overshadowed by the pressures of scaling. It wasn't just about numbers or expanding reach. It was about staying grounded in the core values that had sparked the movement in the first place. One evening, Jake sat down with Emily at their favorite cafe. It had become a tradition to meet here when they needed to talk through things that weighed heavily on their minds. The cafe was small, cozy, and familiar, an anchor in the whirlwind of their busy lives. "You know," Jake started, stirring his coffee absently, "I can't help but feel like we're losing something. We're getting bigger, we're reaching more people, and things are looking up. But sometimes it feels like we're losing the human connection, the intimacy that made what we did so powerful in the first place." Emily looked thoughtful. "I get what you mean. It's hard, isn't it? The bigger we get, the harder it is to keep that personal touch. But I also think we've done a great job in building a structure that allows us to help more people. Sure, it's more formal now, but that doesn't mean we've lost our soul." Jake nodded slowly. "I agree, but I also think we can do more to make sure that soul isn't lost. We've got the resources now, but we need to stay true to what makes us unique. It's about maintaining that personal connection, even as we scale. We can't let the business side of things overshadow why we started this in the first place." Emily smiled gently. "I think we can do both, Jake. We just need to be mindful of the balance. We've already made a huge impact, but if we're going to sustain it long term, we need to be intentional about keeping the heart of what we do alive." Jake sat back in his chair, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Emily was right. The foundation didn't have to lose its core values simply because it was growing. In fact, they had the resources and capacity now to make their impact even deeper and more meaningful. They had to stay grounded, never forgetting the reason they started in the first place. The next day, Jake called a meeting with the leadership team. They had reached a point where they could no longer just coast along with their new structure. They needed to evolve again, but in a way that aligned with their mission and values. They needed to create a roadmap for maintaining that intimate, community-driven approach, even as they reached more people. "I think we've all learned a lot in the past few months," Jake began, addressing the team. "We've made some big changes, and they've paid off. But I've been thinking a lot about what we've lost along the way. I think we've done a good job in scaling, but we've also moved away from some of the things that made us who we are, the personal connection, the hands-on work with the teens we serve. We need to find a way to reintegrate that human element into what we do." Emily chimed in. "We've built a great structure, but the personal touch is what makes us stand out. We need to figure out how to balance growth with intimacy. We need to make sure that, no matter how big we get, the people we serve never feel like just another number." Chris, who had been nodding along, added, "I think it's about building deeper relationships with our community, staying involved, staying present, and making sure that our programs always feel personal, even when they're scaled. Maybe we could host more community-driven events, or have smaller, more intimate mentorship sessions where our team can connect directly with the teens." Sarah, who had been deep in thought, spoke next. "And I think we should also focus on the feedback loop. Let's make sure that the people we're helping have a voice in how we evolve. If we're going to keep the heart of the foundation alive, we need to listen to the needs of the community and adjust accordingly." Jake felt a surge of hope. The team had been right all along. They could scale and still keep the foundation's mission at the center. It was all about being intentional, about making sure the heart of the foundation remained strong no matter how much they grew. In the weeks that followed, the team worked tirelessly to implement their new approach. They introduced community events where local teens and families could come together, share stories, and connect with the team on a deeper level. They increased their one-on-one mentorship opportunities, ensuring that every individual they helped felt valued and seen. They also implemented a more robust feedback system, where the people they served could directly influence the direction of the foundation. The results were immediate. There was a renewed sense of connection among the communities they served. The teens they had helped for years felt heard and appreciated, and new participants in their programs quickly became an integral part of the Foundation's growing family. It was clear that the personal touch, combined with the Foundation's financial sustainability, was the perfect formula for long-term impact. Jake stood back and watched as their model began to thrive in ways he hadn't imagined. They were no longer just surviving. They were truly thriving. And the best part? They had managed to preserve the very essence of what had made them great in the first place. One afternoon, as Jake walked through the newly renovated community center where they had hosted their latest event, he felt a wave of pride. The center was buzzing with life. Teens were laughing, playing games, and engaging in deep conversations with mentors. It was exactly the kind of space he had dreamed of creating when the Foundation first began. Emily walked up to him, a smile on her face. "We did it, didn't we?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, we did. Sometimes, I wonder if we could have imagined this back when we were just starting out," she said. Jake smiled. "No, I don't think we could have. But maybe that's what makes it so special. We stayed true to what mattered, and now look at what we've built. It's not just a foundation, it's a community." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the center, Jake realized that the Foundation's journey was far from over. They had come a long way, but the road ahead was still filled with opportunities. He had learned so much along the way about leadership, resilience, and the power of staying true to one's values. The Foundation had grown, but it had also stayed true to its mission, proving that growth and authenticity could go hand in hand. The road to redemption had not been easy, but it had been worth it. And Jake was more determined than ever to continue making a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. As the sun set on the Foundation's newest community event, Jake stood by the window, looking out over the vibrant gathering. It was a moment of triumph, but also one of reflection. The road they had traveled had been long and filled with unexpected challenges, but they had persevered together. They had grown, they had adapted, and most importantly, they had stayed true to their mission. Jake was finally able to see the full scope of their journey, and it filled him with both pride and humility. He thought back to when it all began. The first few months of their foundation had been full of uncertainty. The late nights spent in brainstorming sessions, trying to figure out how to make a lasting impact. The struggles of running a nonprofit with limited resources. The many times Jake wondered if they were on the right path. But now, with the thriving programs, strong partnerships, and a team that had become more like family, Jake knew they had made the right choices. "Jake?" Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. She had joined him by the window, gazing at the same scene of celebration outside. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Jake said softly, turning to face her. "When I started this, I didn't know where it would take us, but now, I can't imagine doing anything else." Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the same pride Jake felt. "You know, I don't think any of us knew what this would look like, but we took a risk, and we stuck together. And here we are, helping more people than we ever thought possible." Jake chuckled. "It's crazy, isn't it? But you're right. We took that leap of faith, and in the end, it was worth it." He paused for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the crowd outside. "It's not just the numbers, though. It's the people, the lives we're changing. That's what makes this all so meaningful. Every face, every success story, every person who walks through those doors and feels seen and heard, that's what this is all about." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And you know what's even better? The ripple effect. We've created something that will keep growing, keep reaching more people. The teens who come through our programs will go on to help others, and those people will help others. It's like a never-ending circle of support and growth." Jake's heart swelled with gratitude. That's the dream, right? To build something that lasts, not just for us, but for the generations to come. As the evening wore on, Jake and Emily joined the rest of the team. They watched as the event unfolded with joy and laughter. Teens shared their experiences with mentors, families exchanged stories of hope, and volunteers worked together to ensure the event was a success. It was everything they had envisioned, a true community event where everyone had a role, where every person mattered. Jake felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Sarah, their operations manager, holding a clipboard and a smile on her face. "We've got some good news," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "What's up?" Jake asked. "We just received a new grant from one of our biggest corporate partners. It's enough to fund our expansion into 2 more cities," Sarah reported. Jake's eyes widened. "That's incredible. When does this take effect?" "Right away," Sarah replied. "The plan is to start training new staff and partners in those cities, so we can hit the ground running." Emily clapped her hands together. "That's amazing. It's a game changer. We've been talking about expanding for a while, and now it's really happening." Jake felt a sense of accomplishment, but there was no time to rest. The growth they had dreamed about was happening. The foundation was evolving into something much larger than he had originally envisioned. But it was also a reminder of the responsibility that came with this growth. They weren't just helping people in one city anymore. They were going to help teens and families in other places too. And with that responsibility came the need to stay grounded in their mission. The following months were a whirlwind. The new cities were a challenge, but the team was ready. They took what they had learned from their experience in their original city and applied it to the new locations. The support they had received over the years had laid a strong foundation for this next phase of growth, and they were determined to do it right. Jake found himself spending more time traveling between the cities, ensuring that the foundation's values were upheld at every new location. He met with local leaders, organized community events, and worked closely with the new teams to ensure the programs were being executed with the same passion and care as the original city. It was a massive undertaking, but Jake knew that each step forward meant they were closer to making an even greater impact. One evening, as Jake was reviewing reports in his office, his phone buzzed with a message from David Harris. The two had remained close friends and business partners throughout this journey, and David's advice had been invaluable in shaping the foundation's future. Jake smiled as he read the message. "Hey Jake, I know you've got a lot on your plate right now, but I just wanted to take a moment to say how proud I am of everything you've accomplished. You've built something incredible, and I'm excited to see where you take it next. Keep going, don't stop." Jake sat back in his chair, allowing himself a brief moment of reflection. It was the kind of message he had received many times throughout this journey, messages of encouragement and support from friends, family, and colleagues. They were his reminder that this wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had joined the mission along the way, everyone who believed in the cause and made it their own. The foundation had come so far, and Jake knew they couldn't stop now. There was still so much more to do. But as he looked out the window at the city below, he felt a deep sense of peace. They had built something lasting. They had built a community. And with that, he knew the foundation would continue to change lives, not just in the present, but for generations to come. Final thought. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day struggles, but every step we take is a chance to make a lasting difference. What's one thing you've learned on your own journey that has helped you stay focused on your mission? Share it with us below, and let's continue to support each other on this road to making the world a better place.